So you're doing those beer dinners, right?
Well, one for now.
Yeah.
See how that goes.
So what all does that entail?
Writing the menu, and basically Brian met with Surly, and they were interested because the Gnome used to do a lot of beer dinners on the regular. So it's always been, we had talked about it too. We'd also originally done it where part of the Give Hope, like that would be one of our give backs kind of things, like any proceeds that we do during offset dinners or pairings paired with the theme of, craft beer, we could then take and put towards the donations and stuff like that. So
Sick.
that was going to be one of our bigger takes on trying to do that for each restaurant, trying to do a different thing. Obviously with COVID, we don't know what's going to happen. Are people going to be, do they want to be in a group setting? I mean, essentially we're looking at doing it upstairs, just all by itself. So it's a little more spread out and things like that. Groups and stuff. Of course, Surly's, no one's been doing any dinners or anything since COVID.
Yeah.
So all the brewers are just, not just Surly, but anybody's like, hey, if you guys are going to do it, let's do it.
Yeah, they're chomping at the bit.
Yep.
So what does all that entail? When I ask what it entails, I mean like it's a coursed out menu. Mm-hmm. Is it a different beer for every course?
Yeah.
And like, yeah. So let's get into it a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's just dive right in.
Yeah. Essentially, when we sat down with Surly real quick after our manager meeting last week, it was kind of just pull the trigger, let's go.
Yeah.
So I got a list of the beers that they really wanted to do. Got in touch with their brewmaster, and he gave me some notes, flavor profiles, and stuff like that. I was familiar with a lot of them already, so that was convenient. I knew the notes and the main things to look at, and went online. Different beer, like Beer Advocate and stuff like that is a site that you can go get a lot of notes and comments from people that have done it, and kind of just started picking what order we were going to go in. There was a couple things that they asked that we do. They're like, oh, well, we have a bottle age series with, it's the Surly Darkness that they did in 3 different like flavor profiles.
Yeah.
One's a mole, one's like a old fashioned notes, and then I'm forgetting the name on the first one. I think it's just like a double barrel aged one.
Yeah.
So they were like, hey, we don't have, we're going to put a bottle of this like for the meet and greet kind of thing. And I was like, okay, cool. So they were like, we want to feature that first. And I was like, and they're like, after that, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So essentially when I was looking at it and I had all my notes and just laid them out, it ended up being like, okay, well, if I start that's a little heavy, so I need to go lighter. And, you have your standard progression of a meal where it's, you can do an amuse-bouche and then something small go into something, seafood, or then kind of a salad, kind of bounce around kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then just go with the progression. And then obviously reading the notes is how, I like to kind of pick some things like, oh, I want to do a quail, or, oh, I want to do something like this. And then you kind of adjust the food to pair with the notes. It's like, what's it going with? What's it sauced with? Things like that. So, and in the meantime, also thinking about execution. Like, how are we going to do this? Hey, this dish sounds great. But that's never going to, I can't do 50 of them a la minute upstairs by my, like, it just doesn't work.
I feel like that's almost a personal shot at me. We need to think about execution.
We both learned from that.
We need to think about execution.
There was a time that we both failed in that.
Okay, so for some clarity, by the way, welcome to Minnesota Well Done. Right. Yeah, we just we dove right in. I have an old friend. Well, old friend at this point. Holy shit, time flies.
Right.
An old boss again. Every episode somebody's like, "Oh yeah, you worked for somebody else. Maybe he had a drug problem." But he was an old boss of mine, coworker of mine, and very talented chef. He's been exec at Lolo. He's been CDC at PS Steak, CDC at Lexington. Let's see, you were...
Not PS Steak.
Oh, not PS Steak?
No, I was just cooking there.
Oh, you're just cooking there. Okay.
Yeah, that was a break after the Lexington.
And then, let's see, Public, and then those are the ones that I super know about. Mm-hmm. But you've worked around the country, right? You worked down in Atlanta. You were a chef down in Atlanta, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so then you came up here, and now you're at the Gnome. right? And we'll get into the Gnome. We're already getting into the beer dinner around the Gnome. But for everybody at home, it's Aaron Cave, Chef Aaron Cave.
Hi.
Hey.
Nice to meet you.
No, I'm excited to have you on the show, and I'm excited to talk to you a little bit. And we got into the beer dinner, and we're gonna get back into the beer dinner. But I want to talk about execution since you brought it up. Okay, so it is a little bit of a shot at me, but it was kind of a shot at us, right? Mm-hmm. So for people who aren't, cooking constantly for large groups of people or for heavy services, large volume, it's easy to kind of like look at somebody and go, oh, well, why isn't your food elevated, right? Or why aren't you doing it, in the traditional way, right? And a lot of it, well, I'd say you just have to first get over the obstacle of execution, right? So this is a story back from when we were working at Public, right? I was your sous chef, and we set up this badass Valentine's Day dinner. I mean, it was badass, right? Like,
oh yeah.
We had I think 3 different tiers of stuff that we were doing, and then we had like a seafood section of the tier, red meat section of the tier, a pasta section of the tier, and then a couple different appetizing options, and then desserts. All completely different than our normal menu, right? So how many people did we have in the kitchen? Total was like 6. And then on the day, like actually working the line would be like 3, max 4.
Including Garmo.
Yeah. So it was like we were really pushing the envelope already. And so what happens is we could do all of that if we had an hour to do everything. And we can do it if we have it set up in the right order and we have everybody like locked in. That's part of the reason like restaurants have these like soft opens and it takes them kind of like a month to get going, is because once you find out the intricacies of, oh, that took 5 minutes for this to actually cook, right? In theory, it cooks in 3 minutes, right? But in
actual execution.
Yeah, in reality, with the not even with the most talented chefs, it can take an extra 2 minutes, and then you multiply that by 20, and you're
Got
an
some
hour
problems.
behind, on just one dish. And so we got screwed on Valentine's Day. I shouldn't even say we got screwed, just like a lot of, I feel like, you take pride in people having a good experience, and there were clearly some people who did not have a good experience. Like the food was good, and all the food came out well, but I mean, people were waiting way too long. I don't want to say on air how long it took, because I'm trying to like showcase your skills.
Like, he's not gonna say this.
Showcase my skills. Let's just say it was bad. But the cool thing about it is that the next day we were able to go, okay, here's where, because all right, one of the problems is I was being super neurotic, right? That chef and cooks get super neurotic, right? Especially if you've like created the dishes, you want to be like, okay, well, no, your bechamel's a little bit off nappe, and like, okay, just like let me do it, and then all of a sudden you have like, I was literally stacking pans, and once you have a pyramid of pans, you realize that you've made a mistake, but you can't.
By then we've already got tickets full rail. And
you're drowning, and you can't undo the whole system that you've set up, so you just kind of gotta deal with it. Yeah, deal with it. We say bend over on the line, but that's not maybe, I'm trying to like toe the line between acceptable and non-acceptable. So anyways, long story short, the next day we did the same in sales, right? It wasn't Valentine's Day proper. It was the day after, but it was a Saturday, and we killed it, and there was like no complaints, and everybody loved the food. And then we started to see, a spike we were only open for another month before COVID hit, but we started to see, good things happen after that. But it kind of changed the way that I looked at things.
We learned our limit.
Yeah.
Kind of from an execution standpoint of there's a lot of factors. Kitchen size, where the arrangement and stuff like that. I mean, especially when it's not a brand new restaurant and things are inherited. of location and where things are, that has a lot to play with it too. And then, that just from concept design and to menu design, you got to kind of, sometimes you have to unfortunately put some things on the back burner if you're hindered by something because of that.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of adaptation, and we had to adapt that night, and it was certainly a learning experience. And frustrated at the end of the day, frustrated or not, it's when you just got to put your head down and just do it. And then after service, then get through the service. I mean, everybody's been there. If you've been in a restaurant, it happens. It's inevitable at some point in time. You want it to be as best as you possibly can, and then everything's a learning experience from that.
Yeah, I love that you call it that, because that is exactly what it is. And so the problem that I had went away like overnight. That was what was so powerful about it for me, was like, I started with this issue of not sharing sharing the workload, and not, and I don't think that it was like too common of a problem for me, but like the stark difference between that night and the next day, I think was the most powerful learning experience of it all. Is like, oh, we just changed these things and then everything's okay. We don't have to suffer.
Right.
The people don't have to suffer, So, and I also think it's cool that we're talking about this and you're talking about these concepts, because I feel like that is a little bit what you've had to do at the Gnome, right? So, for anybody who lives under a rock, the Gnome is back open. Used to be the Happy Gnome. They closed. They had all these money problems. They clearly weren't managing it well. And then, Brian Ingram of Hope Breakfast Bar, I've talked about it a little bit on the show, but it's like they're back in business, right? And when you started off, it was kind of just like, we just need to get open, right? COVID's hitting. We need to take advantage of as much of the summer as we can, get it open, and then we'll slowly improve both the menu, execution, service, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You want to talk about that a little bit, and like how that has changed over like the last couple months even?
Well, I mean, it was certainly an interesting concept too, because after helping with the Handsome Hog move up the hill, and then we literally jumped right into, they were already starting demoing the building, so helping with that during the week, in there as much as possible. So you start to see the change, which was really cool. Obviously, taking over an older restaurant, there was some challenges and some issues. The kitchen was totally redone, but at the same time, you're still stuck within parameters of space and where you can put things. One thing that Christos likes to pick on me about a lot is we didn't have a walk-in right when we opened, and there was a lot of challenges with refrigeration, and I
would send him pictures of walk-in coolers.
Yep, all the time, and then
tell him specs of different walk-in coolers. Like, wouldn't this be nice to have
and
on
a
a daily
constant reference of, hey, did you put that in the walk-in? Or like, oh no. So, I mean, obviously those problems have been worked out.
Yeah,
and things are a lot better. But yeah, it's literally we're going through that. Then it's like, hey, we had our set date. It got pushed back. The state of Minnesota has been back on a lot of things, licensing and between alcohol and just all different sorts of things like that. We had already done our health inspections. We're ready to go. Keep getting delayed. In your mind, that, but you're never truly prepared to open. Like even just ordering food, it's like, okay, I can get non-perishables in, and then I'm just waiting, and then you get the green light, and it's like, all right, let's go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we did a mock open, we did a mock service, friends and family, and then we kind of worked out some kinks that night, lots of different changes. I mean, all in all, and Brian will say the same thing, you said it numerous times, from a restaurant opening standpoint, it's one of the smoothest that I've ever been a part of.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, kitchen-wise, we had, obviously with everybody closed down, I had a great staff on deck.
Yeah.
People that had worked for me before. It was an easy transition. They know my expectations. I know their abilities. It wasn't a whole lot of questions.
Yeah.
And I mean, essentially, we ended up having too many people and having to cut. And unfortunately, that is part of the game at some point in time. But we had a great opening staff, people that worked hard, a lot of talent just from the cooks. I mean, a lot of these people will move on and they will be chefs, sous chefs at some point in time. Probably a few of them might even have their own restaurants.
Yeah.
Probably sooner than later, the going rate. So it was great to have that, but even then, you're like, oh wow, this setup is wrong. Even just from the small little logistics of where you're putting pans on the line and what backups do you need, the volume of food that we went through in the first couple weeks, having walking in knowing we had 800 covers on the books and stuff like that is phenomenal, and it was literally just go from open to close. So, I mean, when we have that big of a patio, which is great. And it's that time of year where everybody's out. It was fun to be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very stressful at the same time. You don't spend a lot of time at home. I was pretty much there. But the transition to get into a smoother thing happened fairly quickly, as opposed to a lot of times I've seen it take months, and even it's totally different the year after.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, okay, this doesn't work. Even if it's moving equipment around. I mean, at Lolo, when we opened Hudson, that we've almost reorganized the kitchen halfway through it.
Yeah.
So those little things like that, and it depends on the people that are around you. Like, some people are super compulsive and are very, very particular, and some people are more, go with the flow, and it's kind of just finding that happy medium.
Yeah.
Because no one's ever the exact same.
Yeah. That's one thing that's always impressed me about you, is you're able to kind of like find that balance between, I mean, you're very good at the human element of leading in a kitchen, right? I mean, everybody has their problems with certain staffs, and we don't need to get into certain, points of time. But I mean, like I definitely saw at Public, you were able to definitely toe a line between, like you said, maybe neurotic is not the right word, but the more compulsive and the more particular minds. Gavin, shout out to Gavin. We've had you on the show, but it's true. There is that thought process of, I need this to be a specific way. And then you have people on the other side who are very free flowing, i.e. Colin,
Right.
And it's awesome to see that mesh, right? I also think it's cool how you say things like, where the pans on the line are really important. And I think this is where that particular like way of being kind of gets set up. But I think that it's so important to find a happy medium, because like when we were at Public, right? We had casties and we had high carbons, right? And cast irons pans and high carbon steel pans. Sorry, sometimes you get talking to people and you're like, what is he saying? Just saying random words. Anyways, you have all these heavy pans, and at first we had them like in the oven and like that, or no, we had them on the burners. Yep. And then the burners weren't like we needed all the burners. So like every time that I needed to use that back burner, I'd have to like put all the pans over on the other side, and then one day we just like decided to put them into the oven, right? And then they were all hot, ready to go. You had to use a towel, but I mean, you should be using a towel all the time anyways. And once that, everything, it just was like such a weight off your shoulders. Like once we figured out the ebb and flow of the kitchen, and you're figuring out these little small things, it makes huge differences, and huge difference in ticket times.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, and when I bring up ticket times, I kind of it shocked something in my brain about how the Gnome has had to operate kind of post COVID, right? So like you're at half capacity inside, right? And you're at full capacity on the patio, but that's still not full capacity, right? So so turnover becomes this, I don't know,
it's a bigger issue.
The most important thing.
Well, especially with with COVID guidelines, handed down by the state, I think it's 90 minutes. They don't want people at tables for more than 90 minutes.
Oh, they have like
that's a legit
there's
thing.
a legal limit.
So
wow,
there are times
that.
where we actually have had, it's on our website when we use Talk for reservations.
Yeah.
It comes up when they do their resis.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where that's a state guideline is people can't. So essentially your campers and people that hang out for a long time, sometimes creating a massive bill, sometimes not spending any money.
Yeah.
That has to not be a thing. It's a few times we've actually had to let tables know, like, hey, in about 15 minutes, it's time to turn. We're going to have to ask you to go. It's gone over pretty well. You have the go-to card of these are COVID guidelines that we don't make.
Yeah.
We're just following them. So that does create the turnover. It's when Brian Ingram came to me right when we were talking about opening, he's like, I want to run, under 20-minute ticket times no matter what.
Yeah.
To me, I just froze. I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Like, how in the hell am I supposed to do that?
Yeah.
We're looking at our guidelines and stuff, and we did some, menus that we had mocked up. So then we started going, we had to kind of change the direction. Because when you and I wrote a menu to begin with, super Nordic theme, certainly could not have been executed in a 20-minute window. So it would never have happened. It would have been an epic nightmare.
Yeah.
And with the facilities.
It's a great menu, though.
Yes.
By the way.
Some of those things will come into play. Again, that is for sure.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, after talking with him and what his goals were and him showing me like the reasoning behind it, and he starts throwing in that kind of information, like, we need to turn this. If we can turn this, we have to go with volume.
Yeah.
Looking at a lot of the other restaurants that are closing, unfortunately, a lot of those are those traditional longer dining experiences.
Yeah.
And they're not doing well. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of it, there's a lot of things to play, like what's your rent, where are you located, that kind of thing.
Right.
So
but
we wanted to take the benefit of the Gnome up on Cathedral Hill. The Happy Gnome it's a neighborhood name.
Yeah.
Everybody knew about it, especially in St. Paul. If you find someone in St. Paul that had never heard of the Happy Gnome, then it'd be few and far between.
Right.
So even people that come in now, they're like, oh, is this a different restaurant? They're still under the impression it was the same one.
Yeah.
And then we go through and they're like, it looks a lot different because we, remodeled and opened up a lot of the inside and stuff like that. And the upstairs is totally different. So, but once getting that information, then it starts to make more sense, where it's like, okay, now I see why you're pushing this time. So there's times now where we're averaging, 12, 13-minute ticket times, and food just comes out.
That's so crazy.
And it's hot and it's good. It's just that's adjusting the way you cook in so many different ways, as opposed to taking that. It's not taking the refinement out of it, but as opposed to how do you get to this point in a shorter period of time.
Yeah.
So, sous videing things and doing things ahead of time that you can do that doesn't jeopardize as opposed to starting a chicken from raw, doing this.
Yeah.
How do you get it that way? I mean, our beer can chicken is something that we sell a copious amount of.
Yeah.
If I were to take chicken and even and start it from scratch, it would take me half an hour just to cook the chicken properly.
Yeah.
And then you run into, there's more margins of error when you start from a raw to whatever. Is it drying out? Are what are your heat levels? Those little finite things that you have to pay a lot of attention to, you can try to mimic and try to alleviate that part of it so that it's already ready to go. And then it's just finishing and just have it ready to put on a plate in a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
Some of it is sandbagging some stuff. It's a bad term, but not in a way where it's the food quality is just sitting there rapidly dissipating.
Yeah, well, I mean, and here's the thing: the term sandbag has become negative, but it's people do it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're saying is you're doing it in a refined way. I mean, sous vide, in my opinion, is the best way to prepare most
everything
meats.
It switched from a thing where it really prep heavy.
Yeah.
The refinement and the fine tuning.
I think that's a great way to say it.
Happens
Yeah.
before it ever hits the line.
Yeah.
So that's the slower processes, those good things that when you're really bringing out flavors.
Yeah.
So when that happens to begin with, essentially we're just finishing it on the line.
Yeah.
It's a one way to look at it.
Yeah.
From scratch cooking from a straight raw product, there's only a few items, obviously fish and shellfish and stuff like that, and burgers and things, and our chicken sandwich that we sell those are the raw products. Everything else has already been manipulated in some way, shape, or form.
By someone on your staff.
Yes. By braising the meats and the different, we have pork and barbacoa and stuff like that. And it was, even with that went with the menu design in the direction that, and Justin Sutherland was involved in that in the beginning as well, where we were like, what's going to work, what's not. Can you do this in this amount of time? Can you do this? So when we launched with not a giant menu. It was pretty basic to set up a theme. So even when we just did a menu change, it's just mild ads and then changing with seasonal stuff. And then we find out what our limitations are.
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, this can work, or I can add one dish to this. It's a lot of paying attention to, I can't just keep adding things to saute. In my mind, that's what I always do. And I'm bad at it just because I always like to work saute.
Yeah.
And typically the better cooks do saute in a broiler if you have a double broiler, because those are the money stations. Those are where the most experience is. Typically your better cooks. And that's what you tend to be comfortable with adding, because in my mind, I'm going, how would I make this dish?
Yeah.
I don't typically go, well, how do I do something in a fryer to make this dish? You know what I'm saying? I take it from a different aspect where I'm like, ooh, I like this dish. We can.
Let's take a break, and then let's get into how we build dishes.
Got it.
Because it's not something that I've really talked about on the show, and I could talk to you for hours about it.
Yes.
All right. We'll be right back. All right, so we're back. Maybe. Let's start talking about how we build dishes. Why don't you walk me through how you built your duck dish?
Essentially it was, I had played around with the dish before years ago. I started with, hey, I want to add something a little bit different, a little bit more elevated than a beer can chicken. Yeah. Obviously, it's a great seller. Let's see what we can do.
Right.
The Happy Gnome in their heyday they did put out some really good food at a good point of time.
Dude, for real, yeah. I've had multiple good meals at the Happy Gnome.
And so it was kind of like, hey, if we're going to do that, let's try to just the same reason why I put a tartare on the menu, because they had a tartare.
Yeah.
And then just tweak the setups and do stuff like that. And some of the things that fit along with that. So it's like, all right, well, let's try to elevate. Let's take one step further and elevate. Like, okay, we have chicken. Let's add duck. We were already doing the whole bronzini. It's like, all right, I want to add another fish.
Yeah.
So it's like everybody in Minnesota loves salmon. So I put salmon on the menu.
Yeah.
Which has gone over well. So it's one of those things like, hey, let's just take another step up and we'll just keep going until we find out what works or doesn't. So it's like, all right, well, what's a good thing? Duck. It even goes with the execution of, okay, well, then we'll confit and do stuff like that. Well,
explain what confit is.
Confit, well, the process with duck legs is you take them and you cure them, depending on what kind of flavor profile, herbs, sugar, salt. Let that go for a few days, pull them, rinse them, let them dry, and then you want to submerge them in their own fat.
The French term confit literally means with fat. Mm-hmm. So anything that's cooked in its own fat is confit.
Yep, and you want it totally covered and low and slow until it's cooked through.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you go too long, then it turns into almost it all breaks down. You want it to retain its shape.
Yeah.
That way you can pull it out and then cook it. Definitely locks in flavors, makes it even adds to the richness to it. There is obviously margins of error, but it's one of those things, and it's almost a preservative as well, because you can keep it in the fat. Yeah,
so you have the cure preservative aspect, and then you have the confit preservative aspect. So you greatly lengthen the time that it's shelf stable and delicious. Mm-hmm. And I have had your duck, and it was executed really well. But yeah, go on with the rest of the dish. How did you build the rest of the dish, flavor profiles, etc.?
Yeah. And then it was from there. I was like, all right, well, I want to starch with it, but we already have polenta on the menu, and I didn't just want polenta on everything.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, let's do something different. Obviously, first thing that comes to my mind is gnocchi.
Yeah.
Then the number one thing, the next thought that happens is, how would we ever execute gnocchi?
Yeah.
Making it on a daily basis, because we would almost have to, because I don't have, I mean, you could make it scratch and then freeze it.
Yeah.
I don't have a whole lot of freezer space.
Yeah.
So then you have to adapt to that and adjust. Well, that doesn't work.
I had a lot of gnocchi and spätzle and all these dumplings on the original menu, and this is why that menu wasn't working. So it kind of harkens back to our conversation on execution. I just think to me it's fascinating. Just all of this that goes into one dish. Yep. Sorry, continue.
No, and then it was, all right, I want to starch. So it's like, all right, I love spätzle.
Yeah.
And then it's, all right, that's something it's easier to make, and there's less of a margin of error than gnocchi.
Yeah.
Because if you mess up a batch of gnocchi, typically you don't find out till later, and then you're serving mush in a pan, and that's when people start throwing things and just dumping things in a trash can.
Yeah.
And it's just not something that we could do. And back to that gap of that refinement of what can we execute on the line.
Yeah.
So that had to get scratched. And then it was like, all right, cool. And then it was just, all right, this needs a little more salt. This needs a little more fat. This needs this. And to me, duck and cherries are kind of, you see that a lot. It's
Definitely
not really a big thing. And then it's just tasting it and then being like, I want a little more sweetness to this. I want a little, actually, a little heat would be good.
Yeah.
And just kind of tinkering it from there. But in my mind, it was, how do I make a dish that I know, like, pre-set up parameters? It can't be, I know I can't execute a 2-pan pickup or a 3-pan pickup or anything more than a 2-pan pickup.
That's kind of something that I was waiting for you to get at, because that's one thing that it hasn't frustrated me, but it's something that I didn't used to be really good at, but now I'm much better at, is when I was building a dish, I love to, I didn't make, it wasn't about making the most complex dish, but it didn't, in my mind, it didn't matter how many sauces I had to make or how many pans I had to use, because all that was in my mind was that final product. I wanted to get to that final product. That's the most traditional way to have it. That's it, blah, blah, you know what I mean? You know how I am. It's like, no, that's the most delicious version of the dish. But it took, never 7 pans. But, if it takes 3 pans, that's too many, right? So, find a way to have a 6-pan of your burr or a butter sauce, or a 6-pan of your bechamel with cream sauce, or whatever you're using, right? Have consolidated as much so you don't have as large of a pan pickup, right? So when you're thinking duck, right? Because you still do a sear after the confit, right?
Yeah. So it's a sear, and that's 1 pan, and then the spätzle's in another.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, I don't want a 3rd pan.
Yeah.
Well, then it's I'd use the beer can chicken. First weekend we opened, we were pan saucing each chicken, so the sauce was literally made every time.
Yeah.
That was a nightmare. So literally the next morning, it's like, how do we correct this?
Yeah.
Well, we pre-make the pan sauce. You know what I mean? Take all the drippings because we pre-roast the chickens in the beer cans. Take all the drippings from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And go ahead and get our sauce. It's more consistent that way when we go ahead and do it in advance, and then have it on the line where it's still in a pot and we still cook it, but it's not every single time. We're doing the cooking step once, and then it's all across the board until that batch is gone, and then we'll make more. Which is still done on a daily basis anyway with the amount that we go through. Yeah. So it's just those little things of, all right, and with the cherries, and it's like a gas streak over the top, which gas streak is just basically vinegar and sugar and flavors. Yeah. Acid and sugar, essentially, to make kind of like a glaze. Yeah. So, well, we could have that hot and sitting there and bringing that up and doing that, but it's like, all right, well, I need to pre-make that so that I don't add more cooking process to that one dish. Yeah. So that you don't get bogged down. Yeah. Especially with running ticket times like that, if you're behind on a pickup or miss a whole ticket or something like that, that is something that could literally just cause a ripple effect all the way down the line.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting that ripple effect is kind of like a constant. It's something that you see all the time.
Yes.
That's another thing that I think people don't fully realize about a kitchen is that it is one unit, right? If you see, that's part of my whole thing with ego in the kitchen. Like, I can be egotistical, or I can have like too much pride over a dish, but it's when it spills over to how that influences my behavior on the line that it becomes a problem, because it immediately affects everybody around me.
Yeah, you can have the best cook in the world on your line, but if they don't get along with other people and the rest of the team, that brings down the whole kitchen, even though that person's a rock star.
Yeah.
And you're like, how do we make this work? It is a team, and it goes from everybody.
Yeah.
And that goes, communication on the line is always a big thing.
Yeah.
Huge thing. Callbacks, timing. It's, you can't fake it in a kitchen. It's either there or it's not. If you say 4 minutes and it's not there in 4 minutes, the whole world knows it.
Yep.
There's no lying about it. There's no the
clock's always right there, Doc. What are you doing?
Right?
Get it together, bud.
You said 4 minutes.
Yeah, for real.
So, it's the kind of things, and all it takes is, takes one person from attitude to ability to, everything that goes on in their personal lives. Everybody has, shitty days. How do you make sure that, all right, I know this person's going to be struggling today. How can I make it so the whole line's not struggling because of one person?
Right.
Or if it's attitude, or if it's whatever, if it's conversations, talking to people, just, hey, you got to keep this in mind that, yeah, you're great, but at what cost?
Yeah. So this goes into the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about while you were here is, because you are awesome at that. You're awesome at, when you're building a dish, thinking about how it's going to work on the line, how everybody's going to work with it, which position it's going to be, how many pans it's going to be, how long that's going to take, right? And then you are focused on all of these things, and then oftentimes, and this isn't at you at all, it's like oftentimes then you can't focus on the taste of the dish. You're focused on all these other things, and that becomes your job. And then who comes and steps in and saves the day is the sous chef, right? At least that's how I feel like it was when we were working together, right? And
and then you'd be the one that points out little things.
Christos.
No,
it's just
absolutely.
like
that's what works well together.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what's so important about that relationship, right? And that's why not the hierarchy, because a hierarchy in a kitchen, it can be different depending on what kitchen you're in, right? Not every frickin' kitchen is a galley style kitchen, right? But like when we were at Public, like I could worry about like how the sauce American was a little bit too spicy this time, and like I want to change it, and I like maybe want to do more sofrito when I start it, and stuff like that. And then you can worry about, like, Christos, is this going to take 1,000,000 hours to do, or and that balance between us, the ability for us to step back and go, no, he's right. Because there were many times where you were like, no, we can do that, we can figure that out, and then like, oh no, that's a good idea, I want it, because you want it to taste better, and you know what tastes good, and you're like, yeah, let's do that. And then sometimes it would be like, oh yeah, no, that is going to take 3 pans to do that. No, I'm going to step back, and I'm going to kind of allow Aaron to change it in this way and that way. It kind of brings me to the salmon dish that we made, right? Now, it was a great dish. I don't know if it was the most spectacular dish I've ever made. I don't know if it was the most, but it was a great dish for all of the reasons that we've been talking about, right? Like, it was easy to pick up, right? And it had all of the components of, it had all of the flavor profiles. It had lots of umami. It had sweetness. It had spice in it. It had saltiness. It had vinegar, acid. It had, and everything kind of folded together. The savory, it all kind of like came in, and you had it in every bite. No. But it didn't take a million years to do, and that was caused by the balance between you and I, because that's what we did. I mean, that's what we literally would do when we built menus at Public, is we would just sit in the back and we go, I'd be with a notebook and I'd be like, how about this? How about this? How about this? And and you'd be like, nah, let's not do that. I can get that for cheap. Like, that's in season. Well, that would go good with this. How about we, and then you're like, then the technique element comes into it, right? Like, because with that dish, it was roasted sunchoke bechamel. We did a slaw of cucumbers, carrots. I don't remember the whole fucking thing. But then what really brought the dish together was those pastrami carrots, right? So we'd cure and smoke the carrots, and that tied everything in. And the fact that you just imagined that, you know what I'm saying? You imagined that, and that made the dish, right? So the whole reason that I'm bringing this up is to start to talk about the different intricacies of having a sous chef, the importance of having a sous chef, how you think you should treat your sous chef, how you think your sous chef should act. And your current sous chef is Gavin. This isn't we're not talking about you. We're just talking in general, like, what have you seen? What have problems that you've like started to come into contact with, even problems you've had with me. Let's go. Let's get into it.
I mean, obviously things change over time. I mean, my first exec jobs, I would literally just work the sous to death. Basically it was, I'll do, the upper managerial stuff and you do everything else. Yeah. That's changed. One thing I've really gotten into, and even with cooks as well, is when they come to me with ideas about food and anything that's creative, I'm very open to that. Yeah. I want people to play with things, and sometimes that means they fail. Yeah. Sometimes it means, all right, well, you have a dessert you really want to try. You have something like this. Okay, that's when we ask these questions. How are you going to execute this? Are you going to be the only one that knows how to make this? Is this an easy recipe that I can give an average prep cook in order to do this? Does this have to be, is there only one line cook that can put this dish up the way? Obviously, you have standards and expectations of what you want, especially when it's your dish. You own it. You take pride in it. You put a lot of time and thought and effort into it. I don't put my name on it. It's anything like that. It's like, hey, this is you, but let's try to, it's almost like I'm putting up bumpers and they're bowling. Sometimes they're bouncing back and forth between the bumpers. Like, all right, sometimes we need to narrow that down. That's a great idea. How do we make it work? Can you make it work? And the biggest thing is sometimes you tell people that, no, it's not going to work. Yeah. Or that doesn't fit. That's just sometimes you get to the point where you're like, all right, cool. Let's type this up. And you look at it and you're like, how does this read on the menu? Where would you put this? It feels like it doesn't belong, doesn't it? Yeah. That kind of thing. Yeah. Obviously, when you rotate and do things more frequently, then it's easier to throw those items in. We can run specials and things like that. But when people ask, I'm like, okay, cool. Because a lot of times you have great ideas for food coming from all different people. I mean, I've seen fry cooks come up with things that they're like, I'm like, holy, that's amazing. Yeah. That sounds like a great idea. Can we do it? Not necessarily. First is you look at ability. Are we capable of doing it? Then it's, are we going to sell it? How much interaction do we need? Are we going to have to basically retrain the entire front of the house staff in order for them to sell this dish? What is you got to look at the bigger picture. What is their knowledge point? What is their selling point at? Because there's nothing more defeating than creating a great dish and you stand behind it, like I just said, and then it doesn't sell. Yeah. Then you start to look at everything. Is it... Obviously, sometimes it's blame. You want to know why it's not happening that way. Right. Is it the way we presented it to the front of the house? Is it the way we presented it to the customer? Did we advertise it enough? Should we have done this? Should we have done this? You start asking all these questions, and over time, you start to you can kind of see it's easier to see than it is in the beginning. Yeah. And you're like, oh, well, I mean, everything that I've ever learned in a restaurant has been a mistake. It's based off of making a mistake.
Yeah.
And I've made a lot of mistakes, clearly. Every owner that I've ever worked for or anything like that will tell you that. They'll be like, yep, he's probably a pain in the ass. And for numerous reasons. Sobriety is a big one.
Hey, we brought it up. Right? I didn't know if we were going to bring it up, but dude, I'm super happy to talk about it. Yeah, but
just those kind of things are what, you got to look at the bigger picture. And with a sous, a lot of times, because, traditionally they're on their way up to be in my job.
Right.
And I want them to know what I can do and don't do. Like, I hate doing the paperwork aspect. Yeah. I mean, it's super annoying. So it's a help for me if a sous does scheduling, or, you teach them how to do this, and essentially I'll put up parameters, or like, obviously, hey, we're really high on labor. We need to cut here. We need to cut here. When they're like, how do we do this? How do we do this? It's trying to figure out what it is. A lot of times I don't have the answer. I have to look and figure out how we do it as well. Yeah. So it is a team thing. People, like with sous, you've kind of find out everybody has their own personality. Right. Some people are super eager. Some people just kind of, they have their ups and downs. Some people are just kind of waiting for you to show them or to stop them. To me, I'm never been one to go looking for someone to be like, hey, I want to show you this. Yeah. Because I think you should learn this. I will if it's something very specific, like, hey, this is a good idea, or this is something you should know. But a lot of times I'm expecting you, if you want to know something, then you come to me. Right. And tell me what you want to know. And I ask people too, and I'm like, hey, in the next couple months, what do you want to learn? Right. What is something you want to focus on? And a lot of times they are those crappy things like scheduling and invoicing and stuff like that. I mean, I like to do invoicing because I like to see my prices and stuff like that, but it's those little things of being a chef, and a sous chef, unfortunately, is not a lot of cooking. I mean, I do a lot of cooking just mainly for labor standpoint, and I would go insane if I didn't get on the line on a regular basis. Yeah. But there's plenty of chefs that are hardly ever on the line.
Here's how I look at the more managerial positions in a kitchen. I look at it like cooking in the third person, right? So one thing that I constantly try to bring up to anybody who's looking to be not even just a sous chef, but like even if you're going for a lead line position, or you're going to be a kitchen manager, you need to become a teacher. Yeah. Right. For the executive chef, I think it's cool that I actually think that it's perfect that you don't offer all this information to the sous chef, because it's his job to know all that information, right? Like these books that I have behind me and the books that you have behind you aren't just for show. We don't just put them on a shelf.
They've been read numerous times.
You read them, you reread them, and then when you don't understand what's going on in something, you find a book that explains it to you, right? Like we had that Madison Park book. Oh my God.
Yeah, that was in depth.
Book. And it's just like, you can do everything in this book. It's like, you know what? No, I can't. Okay. Can I take a class? Right. But no, for me, a lot of the time, my most important responsibility on the line was teaching everybody on the line how to do what needed to be done, right? Because we had talents from people who have been in it for years and have worked at some of the best restaurants in the state, to people who this was their first real restaurant job. The last place they were at was the Cheesecake Factory or whatever, and it's like you have to teach them what, like my whole thing, I've talked about it multiple times on the show, is you need to know what an emulsification is, because everything in this realm right here in sauce depends on emulsification, right? Cold, hot, are you doing it with a binder, blah, 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 blah. And then we can go from there and we can work from there. And every day I can teach you something different, right? Especially about a sauce. And then we can make better food as a team. Yeah. Right? Because you know how to do that. And then I don't have to do it. I get to watch you do it. Awesome. And it's one of the best feelings in the world.
It's like a prime example of a chef-sous relationship. Like, I'll use you and I. I know where your skill set is. Like, I know where your knowledge is.
Pretty good, huh?
Yeah. So to me, I don't have to have a conversation with you about the basic things. To me, when I say aioli, I can say, to me, if I write a recipe for aioli, it's make aioli.
Yeah.
And here's your base, and then we'll change it from there.
Yeah.
I'm bad about it. I forget that there are people that don't know that.
Right.
Like, to me, it's like when people talk about hollandaise. To me, it's just an automatic.
Yeah.
I don't break it. But I forget that I used to break it all the time. And then I forget that there's a lot of people that aren't just comfortable. They need specific measurements and stuff like that. I'm just like, I just throw it in a thing and just do it. And it's second nature at this point in time. So I don't think about those details. That's where a sous with the same knowledge steps in, and they're the ones that can, it's not micromanaging. They can pay attention to that detail.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break, and we'll get right back into the sous conversation. We're going to do a quick Patreon ad.
Got it.
Nice. Patreon.com/Minnesota Well Done. That's where I'm at. You can support the show. I have a couple different tiers, and I had a little problem sending the mugs out to you guys, but they are now in the mail. They are on the way. And then I have picked out the cover for the 3-ring binder, and I have recipes set up. So there's lots of good stuff coming out of the Patreon. I'm even starting to do special episodes for everybody. And it's going to be, small tutorials, and we'll see where it goes from there and how the Patreon grows. Again, you can find us at www.patreon.com/Minnesota Well Done. Thanks. Back to the show. All right, so, but sorry to interrupt you. Let's get back into the sous conversation. So we were talking about the importance of knowledge in a sous, right? And how you forget, like, oftentimes with people who are not your sous, like, who are a little bit, I don't know, they're just less
managerial material.
They're less skilled. They're less knowledgeable. They don't, you talk about a hollandaise. I mean, they don't know you to use butter in the hollandaise.
It's called hollandaise.
Yeah, hollandaise, dude. What? How did I not think of that? Hollandaise. Yeah, it's hollandaise sauce with sunflower oil.
Right.
This is the worst thing in the world.
And these are the things that the sous talks to these people about, and then we still talk about it for years.
Oh, yeah.
When you make mistakes. That's one thing in a kitchen is when you make the good ones, they stick around for a long time. You hear the stories. I worked with this guy that did this. Yeah. I worked with this guy that did this. And it's like, just don't ever be that guy. That's what you're just trying to do. And unfortunately, I'm that guy almost every single day still. Every day I drop something and mess up. The only difference is now I know how to correct it in a timely manner.
Yeah. Well, and I always tell people when you're talking about food, right? That's why I love that I have the ability to do this podcast. It's just such a large subject. So you're always going to be making mistakes. You're always going to be learning. You're always going to be getting better, right? Like I learned with the this is one of my stories. This is one of the things that I couldn't do. So when we were fermenting mushrooms, right, we would lacto ferment them, which is already badass, all right? So just the fact that we did that, can I get some credit for that?
Right.
Thank you. And then we'd take the juice and we'd make a vinaigrette out of it. We actually used it for all kinds of different things, and it was a cool way to use what would otherwise be waste. And I could not get it to emulsify with oil, right? Because usually when you do a vinaigrette, you can just do it with oil. You can just, if you do it in the blender, even with a whisk, I could do it with a balloon whip. I could balloon whip that shit for you, dog. And I couldn't make it happen, And now that I'm going through the chemical classes, right? Like in the higher levels of chemistry, I understand why I wasn't able to do it. But you'd have that shit be super thick and fluffy, and it'd taste perfect, and I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And you're like, you threw some shallots in there, and just a couple of things to add body to it, and then the emulsification process was
just kicked in.
It went over what the activation energy was just miles smaller, and it's just oh yeah, okay, they're gonna make fun of me for the next 3 years, and that's what's been happening.
Right.
But no, I think that's such a cool example because like nobody's above that. And that's one of the things that I really love about working in a kitchen is nobody is above this shit, dude. Like you're always on the not on the chopping block, but you're always being tested and you're always being taught new stuff.
And at the end of the day, everybody's expendable.
Yeah.
In essence, I mean, keep that. Everybody has value, and I would never want to take that away from people. Even people that are just basic level and stuff like that, they still have a significant value. But at the end of the day, if I don't show up for work tomorrow, they're still going to be open.
Yeah.
It's that simple. So if people have that in their mindset, it helps balance some things. So then they're like, oh, you don't want to be, you want to be somewhere in the middle. You want to be realistic. You don't want to think too high and you don't want to think too low, because then, then nothing is right. And, you want to have confidence in a kitchen. If you don't have any, I mean, yeah, there are times when you're not confident. There's still times I walk in and I'm not confident.
Yeah.
It's typically with new things. And, I'm not classically trained. I didn't go to school for cooking or anything like that. So I always hinder myself when it comes to creativity of meal dishes. I feel that that's one of my stronger suits, or weaker suits, sorry. But I acknowledge that. So by studying, by going over things, especially with doing things, the logistics and stuff like that tend to be my strong suit. So I'll rely a lot on that. But when it comes to, especially with super artistic looking dishes and display, I always typically go with, what does it taste like? Sometimes it could look like a bowl of soup. And if it tastes phenomenal, then cool. Then we just need to tweak it a little bit so it's not just like a hideous troll on a plate.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's never been my strong suit of, painting with 5 different things and coloring a plate and putting a flower on every single thing known to man.
Yeah.
Is not really my thing.
Yeah.
So, but.
Well, I almost look at it like it's a separate, like.
It's almost another world.
Skill set.
Sometimes, yeah.
Like, plating is a separate position almost in my mind. I mean, obviously we've never had a plater, but like somebody who works the pass, or the guy who does the good swoop, does the swoop, right? Like, oh, you do a good swoop? Can you swoop this for me?
Or it's like, who's doing the quenelles and who's doing this?
Right. Yeah. So I totally agree. For me, kind of growing up in the, when I say growing up, just like growing up in the restaurants, right? The specific restaurants that I grew up in, there was always like, I worked at D-Spot for a real long time, and that's just blasphemy central.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Smalley's for me.
Yeah. And these are dudes who are classically trained and are, Darren is like, I still to this day say he's the most knowledgeable chef I've ever met in my life. And he's the kind of dude who will he'll make this huge, elaborate, 5 level sauce and then put it on a wing, right? And then throw the wings in a plastic basket and then throw them at you and be like, that's how I serve my food, but it tastes fucking good. And then balancing that with like kind of the other side of the coin, where like when I worked for Harsey was like, no, you need to plate it this way because every flavor is perfectly packed into this little bite-sized piece, but it's right here on the plate, right? And that was like a very interesting kind of concept for me, because the plating then had to do with the
meaning.
taste.
Yep.
Yeah. And then I read things like this guy's work, Charlie Trotter, and you look at his pictures and the visual. I mean, it's just like, he's like, I think it might not be in this one, but it's in the fish one, I think. He's like, when you're looking at this page, does your mouth salivate? And I noticed that my mouth is salivating now thinking about it. And he's like, so I've already started to feed you just with the way that the food looks. And so finding the balances between all these dishes, and then like kind of thinking about what our customers, our guests more are looking for, and where they're coming from, and what kind of meals they're used to eating. It's like in the Midwest, man, it's like it's very big, Not necessarily just big portions. Like, I mean, like when you think of a hot dish, right? It's like a big ass thing of it, and then you eat from that.
Heavy,
right?
Is a good word. Yeah.
Yeah, abundant, right? And so like it's not about this. You want to make the plate look as big as it can, whereas in a lot of places that I've worked, they're all about like the plate is this big, and then you got this little tiny portion in the middle, and it's like there's a whole negative space theory to that, but like. I think what people want is they want that rustic feel in the dish, and then they're cool with paying a little bit more money for you to make that rustic dish look fancy.
So Georgia was very familiar with that. Like, it was the same way.
Yeah.
I was the chef at Aspen Signature Steaks there. So steakhouse, big, bold, like big plates, full plates, lots of food, essentially.
Yeah.
Or at least the appearance of lots of food.
Yeah.
And then when I worked in Portland, it was the opposite. So you could see those finite details and stuff like that at the end of the day. In Georgia, if you served a fish that was under, 6 ounces, they're like, this is not enough. This is like literally the portion sizes need to be bigger.
Yeah.
And then you go there and it's like, oh, I have a 2-ounce piece of escalar or something like that. It's like, well, there's a reason behind it because you don't want to throw up after you eat it.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where it was night and day crossing the country, and then coming back here was more like, okay, I feel like a lot of times people, they get a dish and visually for them, if it's a negative connotation, if it doesn't look like it's a full plate of food.
Yeah.
It's just from family dining to that kind of thing. I don't know, maybe if it's just fattening up for the winters. Who knows?
Yeah.
But you see it a lot. And if they before they've even touched the plate, if they're, and this is with no other mods, maybe say nothing to do with it, they sat there and waited for a long time, or if they're haven't been greeted properly or anything like that, then that just throws more into the mix. But if they get a plate of food in front of them and the first thing they see is a negative connotation, that doesn't help anything with the flavor profile. Then you're starting in the hole just to win them over.
Right.
So then if there's a mild tweak in the dish, if something is not just how you want it, it just keeps compiling negativity, and it's magnified. Even though if they were in a great mood and everything was fine and they got it, they would one day post it's the greatest dish they ever had, and they could have gotten the same thing on a bad day, and it's the worst dish they've ever had.
Yeah.
And we face that a lot, especially in Minnesota.
Yeah.
With the passive aggressiveness.
Yeah, man, you were telling me some kind of article before we started rolling that Minnesota is like one of the worst places for bad Yelp reviews.
Yeah, they're pretty much the most the
most
in the country for reviews. Via Yelp or Facebook or any other social media of reviews of restaurants.
Well, I'm fighting back, dude. I'm doing these. Yep, dude. I'm clapping back at them, man.
Right.
One at a time, dude. I'll be the soldier.
Yeah.
I'll be the soldier. But
So.
I think that's it's important to understand that it is an experience. When people say, like, you watch Chef's Table or you watch whatever you watch, right? Whatever Netflix thing that you watch. Non-Netflix thing that you watch, Food Network thing that you watch, everybody's like, you're selling an experience. And it's like, you really, really are. It's not just a saying. It's not just woo-woo, froofy. I'm trying to, like, make it all artsy. You are selling an experience. And if any part of that experience isn't good, then you're screwed. And I kind of, want to get into something that, that I'm a little bit, like, sensitive about, but we already talked about it a little bit earlier when we were talking about kind of how the flow of everything, and how when you make a dish, you have to make sure that your front of house knows about the dish and is able to present the dish well, and they're able to execute on their end. I think that a well-oiled front of house and then a front of house manager that is very communicative with the head chef or whoever's running the line at that time is one of the most important and overlooked things in a kitchen to date. I mean, if you go into a place, like, we'll just use Public as an example, right? Like, one of the biggest projects that we had at Public as a kitchen was educating the front of house.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we did educate the front of house, things started, I mean, it was night and day.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of stuff that we could sell changed like that. I mean, I remember, shout out to Taylor. There was a point in time where Taylor, I think he was just kind of like, maybe he was just frustrated with the job.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was something personal. But I could remember we started talking to him about the fish that we do. We do a different whole fish every week, and we do a different set, and we use different things, that we had left over from the menu. And teaching him about that dish made him more invested in the dish, and then he would sell, 3 $50 fish meals, in an hour. And it's like, that is just like, that's what it's all about, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that goes with communication too. I mean, it's a little different from a back of the house perspective, because, to me, I'm like, if a cook's like, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm like, go study it, go read a book, go do something. It doesn't really work that way with a front. You're not like servers. You're like, oh, you don't know what aioli is. Well, go find out.
Yeah,
you can, but that doesn't get you very far.
Right.
So it's more of those things. It is teaching. It is having constant interactions and going over. And sometimes that falls to the wayside, and you feel it. If you're not having daily lineups and you're not doing it, which I'm bad about. There are times where I'm just like, there's other things going on, or, there's not a lot of changes today or anything like that. I don't have, there's no 86 items. There's no limited counts on anything. Everything's good to go. I don't need to talk to them. I should do, me personally, I, should do a better job on numerous occasions. I have to, it's hard to get out of the mentality of, I told them once, they should know it.
Right.
It's more of repetition. It's how do you present it? It's not just going over the ingredient list, explaining what it is, where it's from. It's more like also stepping into how do you approach it to a table? These are the random questions. At first we were getting a lot of, servers would come up a lot, and I was just like, hey, gather the most common answered questions, and let's see if we can maybe put that information on the menu so it helps out, so you don't have to ask, or I present all this information to you guys all at once, so that it's retained, and then you don't have to, because I've been in the front of the house as well, so there's nothing worse when you're at the table and you have to leave the table to find out an answer.
Yeah.
There is a lot of fake it till you make it a lot of times, but you don't want to be totally wrong. Like when someone's like, what's a pepita? And someone says, oh, it's a chili. And I'm like, no, that literally just happened. But it's one of those things like, no, you don't want it. Like, you can kind of wing some stuff when you're at the table, but at the same time, you don't want to be wrong, especially in today's age with allergies and so much focus on certain ingredients and where they're from and what's going on. Your knowledge has to be a lot more.
Yeah. Well, and we've proven, and maybe, I want to get somebody from the front of house on. I haven't decided who I'm going to talk to it about yet, but I think that I've seen people be able to sell more when they have this information, when they have this knowledge. Obviously it depends on the skill of the person, kind of like their demeanor. But like we had this wonderful woman, Allie, work for us, and she was very good at using the information that we would give her to kind of sell it to the table. And then she'd rack up the dough. So it's good for everybody involved. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of my whole thing. I saw a quote from David Chang, and I'm not a huge fan of David Chang. I mean, I obviously I can't speak on his food, right? I haven't had his food. I'm on the fence, right? But he had a quote about how I'm not even gonna do a full quote. I just got to give him credit where credit's due. It talks about how when you focus on the good of the ship or the good of the team, everything else kind of comes along, right? So like I think it was, that's just a good thing to focus on when you're talking about the front of house. It's like, this is good for everybody involved. It's not just good for us, so we don't have to tell you, what's in the dish, but it's also good for you because it makes you more money, and it's good for, the business because people are going to be happy, and it's good for the line cook who is cooking it because he doesn't have to cook it 3 times, I just think, it's like important things like the differences in taste between lamb and beef. It's like, if you can explain that to somebody at the table and go and kind of change their mind on if they want lamb, then they're having an experience. Oh, this is the first time that I'm having lamb. Yeah. Oh, and then the Gnome is the first place that you had, well, let's say duck, because you're selling duck. It's like, oh, yeah, I remember Gnome. It's the first place I had duck. You know what I mean? It's like, in Minnesota, that's like a common thing.
Yeah.
So it's important to the whole body of work. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I just... You know me, I get frustrated when front of house people don't take their job seriously. It's not that if they don't know anything, because like I said before, I kind of like to teach. I feel like I learn things as I teach, right? I mean, people say that all the time. The more you teach, the more you learn. But yeah, so that's one of the ways that I like solidify my skills, is kind of like by passing it on. And then somebody's like, oh, I'm not going to be able to remember that. Like, well, then what are we doing here?
Right.
That's how I feel about it. It's like that you are also an intricate piece that needs to be skilled and needs to, I don't know, do your job.
Yeah, it's funny because it can be so divisive between front and back.
Yeah.
But there's so much connection to it.
Yeah.
We could ruin their day, they can ruin our day just as easily. It goes both ways. There's so many different aspects to what can happen, from seating to organization to mistakes, those kind of things. So and everybody that's been in a kitchen knows this. I mean, or in a restaurant, you've seen it, and it's a goal everywhere to try to bring it closer together. And it's weird because it's always hard to do, to bring front and back together. Like, everybody will have their personal relationships and they're fine, and they'll go hang out afterwards. Hey, they could probably even live together. But you put them as soon as service starts, and it just separates, and you're just like button heads, whatever. It's totally different. Yeah, that's usually washed away by the end of the day, and it's over, and tomorrow's a new day. But the fact that there is so much connectivity to it, if people just sat there and tried to realize it, and we're like, oh, wait a minute, actually, it's easy to point a finger and be like, so this happened because of this, but it's like, we could do this better as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just trying to figure that out of how to, because you've been in a service, super busy, kitchen's hitting on all cylinders, and the front of the house is hitting on all cylinders, and it's like a work of art. Doesn't matter if you're selling chicken wings or, $300 dinners, it's still the same thing. It can be beautiful, and it's great. And then you're like, oh, wow, that was a 12-hour shift, and it's done. Yeah, you're tired. Yeah, you got worked. You're exhausted, but that's almost rewarding to know that you just did it. And you're like looking at sales, you're looking at labor. Like, those are hey, we were very successful today. And if you ask yourself why, it's when everything is working together. You're never like, oh, this was the best day we ever did, and it was a catastrophe in the kitchen. Or, yeah, you say like, yeah, we got worked and we got destroyed, but it's not the negativity.
Yeah.
So it has to go both ways. It's tough sometimes.
I miss it.
Yeah.
I miss that. I miss that feeling at the end of the day where it doesn't feel like you sold 60,000. It doesn't feel like you talk about the negativity, you don't feel any of that, right? When it's over, you don't feel any of that. Yeah, especially if you're not on drugs, especially if you're not like smoking, you don't have other shit going on in your head. But like, even if you do have all that stuff, like, that feeling can wash everything away. Like, people talk about comedy, like the feeling that you get like during a comedy show. It's it's the same, except you've done it to 400, 600, 1,000 people. And it's like, it builds this camaraderie. And, you know, it's 2020. It happens for women too. It's not brotherly. I don't know how to say. Is camaraderie a gender specific term?
No.
I don't know. I'm trying not to be gender specific.
No, it's not.
Because I've had homegirls on the line that I've become incredibly close with, just simply because we just got worked and every plate was immaculate. And even if not every plate is immaculate, everybody was happy. We didn't have any sendbacks. We didn't have. It's like you can see my face getting brighter and brighter. This is why people cook.
Yeah.
This is why people cook, man. And I talk about the love. I've talked about it kind of in depth with other guests, but this is an explanation of what I mean when I say the love. It's not like this romantic love, this, oh, they love me. They have never seen me. They don't know my name. They've never seen my face in many aspects. I mean, or they see, you know, the top of my head.
Right.
You know, but they have eaten my dish, and I know that they've loved it, especially if it's an open kitchen. You can see one person kind of like come up to the kitchen like, wow.
Or when they do walk up and they say something to you and they're talking to you and they want to pull you aside and they're like, that's amazing. It's a very good feeling.
Yeah.
Especially if they're not just, it's one thing, you know, there's not in a kitchen, there's not a lot of, hey, great job. Yeah. I mean, there is, the most rewarding thing is when you're not, you know that you didn't fail.
Yeah.
That's the rewarding part. It's not like you know, everybody gets a participation trophy. That's not the world that it is. Yeah, you say good job, but you know, you try to, you know, build people up and stuff like that. But that's when you know you succeeded, is when someone didn't yell at you. Yeah. Or a plate never came back. There's no comps. There's no nothing about it. You didn't get a complaint, like no complaints. The servers are all like, hey, this is great. You know your timing. You know when you're on or when you're not. And that's super rewarding. So when that guest or whatever takes the extra time, not just paying the bill and tipping really well and writing a little comment on the receipt or whatever they do sometimes, or going home and writing a Yelp review, when they actually get up and they're going to in an open kitchen or something like that, and they're like, hey, great job, or this was phenomenal, that was the best I've ever had, that's even more rewarding. Oh, man. Or just like, even when, you know, back in the day, it would just be like, all of a sudden somebody would walk back and be like, hey, this table bought the kitchen around. Yeah. And it's literally the greatest feeling. You're like, yes. It's like, out of so many kitchens, it's a little different now because it's starting to steer away from just sheer debauchery all the time. Yeah. But in those days, we get paid
in things that are money now.
Yeah. And it would be, we could have the grumpiest kitchens and everything. Like, it could be a terrible service, or not necessarily terrible, but just busy. Yeah. And everybody's starting to get grumpy, and you can tell when it hits that point. Wearing on you. And that's when I'd walk out to the bar and grab a round of beers for everybody and hand them to them, and it's like I just changed their life. Yeah. And it would just, it's like, everybody's looking at me like I'm crazy, and I'm like, well, it just made them all happy for a minute, didn't it? Yeah. Like, they could still go to work. It might not be legal or whatever, but it's one of those things. It was like just a little bit of gratitude, or a little bit of something like, hey, this is for you. And usually it's pretty simple. Yeah.
Well, I think that the reason the simplicity is so effective is because everything that we've been talking about the last hour. You've taken the time to go through all of the prep, right? You've sous vide'd all the ducks, and then you've figured out how many pans that you're going to put this in, and then you figured out the starch that it's going to go with, and then you figured out who's going to be cooking that starch and who's going to be making the gastrique, and you have enough of this, and you're going to get through this service, and it's going to be ready in, you know, this amount of time, and then the server's going to know all about it, and then the front of house manager is going to be able to, you know, consolidate that, and everybody's going to work in tandem. And you talked about it a little bit earlier where it starts to flow, right? But there's so many things that can go wrong that if it goes right, it's like, oh, yeah, that's so amazing.
And it's a great feeling.
Yeah, it really is, dude. It really is. Well, I'll tell you, it's been amazing having you on.
Yeah, it's been great.
Dude, I I had high expectations, but this has been even more enjoyable than I thought it would be.
Yeah, casual. I like it.
I want to just quick plug where you're at. You're at the Gnome right now.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get back into the beer menu, but what beer dinner, right?
Beer dinner.
It's like a wine tasting, but with beer, right? So they're in the little shot glasses.
Just depending on the course, it'll be a sample size of
size.
Well, it's almost 8 courses, and then the intro is 3 beers, so it's quite a substantial amount of beer. I want to say it's maybe 9 beers, 10 beers that they'll be consuming.
It's a substantial amount, but it will be a sample size. So
Absolutely.
It's not gonna
it's not full beer, especially with some
whack.
of these, the Surly Darkness and the Barrel Aged 10 and stuff like
They'll
that.
tip you over for sure.
Yeah, if you drink a whole one, even that might tie one on for you. It's like we got to have a precursor
Here's
for
9.
the menu. You guys can't drive here. You have to prove to us that you've scheduled a Lyft or an Uber or something.
Oh man. So when are you doing that?
November 21st.
And are you selling tickets for it, or
We will be. It should be. We got the menu finalized yesterday, so they're designing we're working with Surly with just designing the actual menu.
Okay.
The layout, and then we'll have that. Should be blasting soon, sometime this week, hopefully.
Where will the tickets be available?
Just online, or obviously if we go into
Look
the
at the
Gnome, I'm
Gnome.
sure we can figure it out.
Website.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I'll put the link to the Gnome's website and some of their social media stuff on the comments section. Is there anything else that you're plugging and planning? Just Gnome right now. Hell yeah, dude. Hell yeah.
So-
I mean, and you're doing. I will say that I've been in there and I've eaten. There was a long portion of time where I wasn't able to come in and eat, and dude, it's phenomenal, man. What you're doing over there. Dang it. So, yeah, a slight technical difficulty, but we'll get right back into it. We're finishing up the show anyways.
Right.
So what we were welcome back, guys. Yeah, welcome back. No, you don't have a problem with your computer. There was just a slight technical difficulty, so a little bit of glitch in the system. So we're talking about beer dinner. We're talking about the Gnome. I was talking about the food that I've had there.
Mm-hmm.
It came out in phenomenal time. The environment's great. The people serving the food are great. And you guys really know what you're doing back there. And everything, that flow that we talked about is definitely happening there.
Mm-hmm.
And I can feel it as like a chef and a cook, where like you just walk into a place and it's just like, okay, it's not going to be a freaking nightmare here.
Mm-hmm. You want it to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Not just, and comfortable, casual, yet still, you can hang out. You can, family's welcome. It's not stuffy. It's, just try to be more consistent with the current environment. Is a little laid back, or try to be laid back to kind of counter the stress of everything that's going on with. I mean, at this point in time, it's affecting everybody in the world in some way, shape, or form, or they know something. And obviously, restaurants are hard in general.
Yeah.
And restaurants are even harder now. Obviously, you see what's closing. You see, for so many reasons, restaurants close on the regular in the perfect climate.
Yeah.
So, as much support as we give, it's, a lot. I've seen a lot of, before it was a lot of competition amongst restaurants. Especially with chefs and stuff like that, they're a little egotistical and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Now more and more so, even restaurants that aren't in the same company, you have no affiliation whatsoever, so there is no monetary gain in any way, shape, or form. It's a lot of unity. Different groups of chefs. I don't work for Justin Sutherland, but we communicate and do so much any chance we get. And the chefs at the other restaurants, and just different groups all together. It's all constantly, hey, what do you need? What can I do for you? You're out of this. Can I help? Just the simple things of even like sharing their stuff, going in to eat. Sometimes even just Facebook shares or YouTube things or Instagrams or anything like that. Just, those little details. You're starting to see a lot more of a unity, because ultimately we can't all fail. or I mean, I guess it's possible for an entire, this whole concept of restaurants to go under.
Yeah.
With to-go food and stuff like that. Everybody's trying to step their game up. That's what we're doing that at the Gnome too. We just picked up Bite Squad. We can do online through our our POS system too.
Yeah.
So different things of trying just to get people, for those people that aren't yet comfortable with dining indoors and being around other people. I mean, yes, we're spaced and all, we follow the guidelines and things like that. But it's one of those things, there's still a lot of people that don't want to leave their house.
Yeah.
By fear or by, in fact, intelligence of just not being around large groups of people.
Yeah.
So for that, it's like, hey, how do we still get our name out there, our product out there, so that we can still try to keep moving. And winters are tough in Minnesota anyway. So unfortunately, in this business, there's going to be a lot more restaurants that close. I mean, I hope it's not the one that I'm at currently.
Yeah.
It's a reality that we face every day when we go into work.
Yeah.
Margins aren't high for restaurants to begin with.
Yeah.
So anything and everything that, I try to support, a lot of people, instead of cooking at home, I will buy food. From a restaurant, even if it's to go, or I try to go out to eat. I don't have a personal problem with it when I have the time. Which is few and far between as well. But it's one of those things that the more that we all support each other and to try to help out and talk with each other and do things, I think we can get through it. It's one of those things.
Yeah, man, wow, that's powerful stuff that you're talking about, because how I have seen it develop is it's almost like we now have a food culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Whereas like before, it was just like these little pockets of people who knew about this kind of food and this kind of food and this kind of food. And now all of the different, cultures across, I mean, because you have Leo with kind of that more Middle Eastern style
Mm-hmm.
food. You have Justin with the Southern food. You have Brian with the more Midwestern style kind
Mm-hmm.
of dishes and brunches and stuff like that. And then you pull once every you have Bap and Chicken with the Korean, and that's all in the same area, and everybody's posting their the
Mm-hmm.
same stuff, and it's becoming that at least the St. Paul side of things
Mm-hmm.
is becoming a unified force.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful to see, man.
Yeah.
And I hope that it works out. And that's part of what this show is about, right? Is to kind of be a place where people can learn about the different aspects of those, the different aspects of that one culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when they go into the Gnome, now they know who's cooking their food,
Mm-hmm.
and they know what you care about, and not just what to expect, but they have kind of like this personal investment in you.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that that culture continues through COVID, after COVID, and it grows and grows and grows. And I have to give a lot of credit to people like Justin Sutherland and Brian, because they've dealt on a whole nother level that we could have another show about, where they're doing multiple restaurants and they're creating these groups of people and they're facilitating this environment where we can all kind of like, I don't know, mesh.
Yeah, especially with Brian Ingram and his wife Sarah. With another thing that was super attractive was their link-in with Give Hope, their nonprofit. So it's already in a thin margin with restaurants, but 3% just from each restaurant go to that nonprofit, and that's a different entity that I don't deal with. But at the end of the day, knowing that you're putting something into it and just trying to change the restaurant culture, we alluded to it earlier, with debauchery and things like that. Like, that's just not the environment that is going to be successful long term.
Yeah.
So being more open with people that we work with and trying to solve problems and do things like that, and be a little more open. It obviously helps with the current environment as well, as kind of being a little more aware of what you say, what you do, what's going on around you. Be a little more observant of other people's the issues that they may have, race, color, creed, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Let's be a little more open and receptive to that.
Yeah.
And try to again, work together and not just come in and do that kind of thing. So that's been something that's been great to be a part of as well.
Can we talk about Hope, the foundation, a little bit? Because I don't know anything about it. Do you know anything about it?
I mean, a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's primarily run by Sarah Ingram. That's her baby.
Yeah.
So obviously, when they opened Hope Breakfast,
One of her babies,
right? Soon to be another one. It's when they opened Hope Breakfast Bar, it was kind of just meant to do their thing, and it took off. And they had, I know Brian's been in the restaurant industry for a long time, from Las Vegas to out west to all over the place. So that's one of the things that they started thinking about, how do we be a little more better to society than just, creating that environment that's, a lot of times not healthy, sustainable. There's a lot of, substance abuse, suicides, and different things a lot of times related to how do we create something that you and I can sit there and talk about is so beautiful and great, yet has this really big dark side too. These little things, let's shine a light into things by creating the environment, and that's kind of their motto. But with the Give Hope, they can, get little things. They started with little Give Hope cards, and people would fill things out. It's well, hey, if I have an extra $1,000, I can help them out. That $1,000 makes this. They were getting a lot of donations and stuff. We just did one with the Children's Hospital last week, where we just did pre-packaged meals, where with heating instructions and stuff like that. They just had a drive-through COVID thing, and they did it out of Hope, which we did the food for out of the Gnome. That went over well with donations and with vendors and stuff. It's a big charity drive that goes to the Children's Hospital across the street. And I guess they had done one the year before that was really big, obviously pre-COVID, where you could actually have people and do stuff like that. So it's definitely more community involvement, but not on a massive scale where you're donating to these huge charities where you can't see where it's going. Focusing on the local stuff. We're going to be doing a Christmas thing soon that Sarah just mentioned to me the other day, where with some of the local inner city schools, of trying to get with the families that are in need, especially with gifts and necessities and stuff like that. And we'll have names and stuff at the restaurants where we'll set up if you want to donate to a family or stuff like that, and we'll try to get that organized as well. So I know that that's the next step that they're looking at, because I was basically informed after Halloween, get ready for Christmas decorations.
Yeah, right.
So, but here's the reason why we're not weirdos doing it way too soon. There's a reason for it, because we're going to be gearing up in order to try to do that and generate funds that can, it is a separate entity than the restaurants, but it is a common theme for the restaurants.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, man, I think that's super cool.
Yeah.
And I think it's super cool that you get the opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Man, thank you so much for coming in.
Love you.
Yeah, I love you too, man. I really do. I'd like to have you on again in the future, and for now,
whenever,
dude. What an episode, man.
Cool.
Thanks everybody for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, share. We're trying to grow this podcast as much as possible. I really appreciate everybody who's already watching. I hope you like the show, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot.